I was let go, said Michael, his voice echoing across the open plan office. Not in the privacy of a conference room or a quiet chat, but right after our weekly team stand-up. I was still holding my latte, the warmth a stark contrast to the sudden chill of the announcement. I thought it was a joke, a bizarre, tasteless attempt at humor from a marketing VP with a penchant for pranks. Then I saw it, the pale blue folder. Not the usual quarterly review, but a termination letter, my name perfectly typed on it. He handed it to me like a returned receipt for a bad product, and my hand trembled as I took it. That's when I saw the date. 2 days ago. Not today, not after my supposed negligent campaign report. 2 days ago. I had spent the weekend finalizing that very report Michael had praised so highly. I'd been with the agency for 11 years. Not a single client complaint, not a missed deadline. I'd written press releases older than Michael's business casual wardrobe, and now I was being fired in front of the new hires, all because a social media spend spreadsheet had a decimal point off by $481.73. That wasn't even enough to cover Michael's daily dry cleaning bill. He smiled when he did it. That's what hit me. Not the firing, not the muffled giggles from the content team pretending to be busy. The smile. It wasn't apologetic. It was triumphant, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. I walked out of the building like a phantom. Not angry, not crying, just detached. It felt like a wire had been cut inside me, and all the energy keeping me upright was slowly draining. The latte, now cold in my hand, had a sticker with my name on it, peeling at the edges like a cruel punchline. Michael hadn't even offered an exit interview, no chance to explain. Just a smug, "We'll be fine without you," as if the entire digital asset management system wasn't something I had built from the ground up, as if I hadn't trained half the people in that room on the very software they used daily. In the elevator, silence. A junior graphic designer, Jessica, wouldn't meet my gaze, but before the doors closed, she reached out and whispered, "You didn't deserve that." I didn't, but my story wasn't over. At home, I dropped my keycard on the kitchen counter like it was contaminated. I sat down, opened my laptop, and connected to my external server. It was hidden behind a stack of old magazines and forgotten charging cables. Michael may have smiled, but what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every campaign report I had ever touched had a mirrored copy archived at home. Every single adjustment, every expense, every budget footnote labeled internal marketing resources or client outreach discretionary. Suddenly, the fog in my mind cleared. This wasn't about a typo. This was a cover-up. And I was the last one who could expose the truth, hidden in plain sight within a maze of spreadsheets. I didn't even take off my jacket. I just tossed my bag on a chair and stared out the window. The world outside was so normal. A delivery truck rumbled past. Kids were playing, the sun was shining. Yet inside, I was sitting with a termination letter dated before my supposed mistake had even happened. I kept seeing Michael's smirk, like a man who'd yanked the last Jenga block and knew the tower was about to fall on someone else. He knew what he was doing. He'd probably rehearsed the line in front of a mirror, imagining how he'd frame my firing as streamlining during the next board meeting. The grief I felt wasn't loud. It was a searing, silent humiliation, a hot iron pressed into my very being. But grief has a shelf life, and for me, it was about 13 minutes. I took off my shoes, walked to the closet, and pulled out my backup laptop. It still had the sticker from my last brand strategy conference on it. Ask me about data-driven narratives. Ironic how no one ever did. I booted it up. The folders loaded. Everything was there. From my first influencer strategy in 2014 to the dummy audits Michael had glossed over during the last fiscal review. I opened the most recent batch of budget memos, just to confirm my suspicions. And there it was. Line item after line item tagged with seemingly innocent names like External Creative Consulting or Strategic Engagement Float. But the numbers were wrong. The math was too perfect, too neatly rounded. A $500,000 legal prep disbursement was paid to a consulting firm that hadn't had a working website in years. Another, a recurring monthly charge under a vendor name I knew was linked to a shell company from a partnership deal Michael had sworn was dead. My mouth went dry. These weren't just errors, they were camouflage. I opened a new spreadsheet and started copying the entries, tagging vendor names, amounts, and approval chains. Somewhere around cell G31, I realized I'd seen this before. Years ago, I had flagged a single odd transfer to a holding account disguised in a client acquisition memo. Michael had told me it was a write-down from a failed pitch, scolded me for chasing ghosts, and pulled me off the project the next week. Like an idiot, I let it go. Now, the ghost was a fully formed monster. The trail I was now on led straight through years of slush funds, all disguised under marketing jargon that only I could decipher. He thought firing me would make this vanish, that I would just go home, cry into my pillow, and maybe vent on a forum. He didn't know he'd just pushed the only person with a full set of receipts into a quiet room with nothing to lose and every reason to get even. By midnight, I had 17 windows open across 2 monitors. My server hummed like it knew it was being weaponized. What started as one-line item had spiraled into a 5-year timeline of fiscal gymnastics. Michael hadn't just padded a few expense reports. This was a sophisticated, elegant kind of corruption that didn't look like corruption because it wore the language of compliance like a suit, strong, technical, and designed to make people nod and move on. He buried fraud under terms nobody questioned: deferred brand integration, equity risk mitigation, post-merger human capital alignment. If you said it fast enough in a meeting, everyone just assumed it was above their pay grade. But I had written some of those budget categories. I knew what they were supposed to look like. What I was seeing was a damn symphony of fraud. Recurring vendor payments that matched no contract I'd ever seen. Transfer approvals with timestamps outside of normal working hours. Every year, just before the audit window closed, just enough money moved around to keep the books clean, but never explained if anyone really dug. Then it hit me. One vendor name kept reappearing, sometimes with a hyphen, sometimes abbreviated, once even written backward. Blackwood Strategies, LLC. I almost laughed. Blackwood, that was Michael's old college roommate. I remembered him from the holiday party 3 years ago. A slick guy with a flashy watch and a handshake like a wet fish. Michael had introduced him as a buddy in consulting, which I now understood was executive code for money laundering with a LinkedIn profile. I opened my clean templates folder, pulled a fresh document, and started typing like I was preparing for a deposition. Dates, amounts, vendor aliases, who signed what and when. I even pulled archived Slack messages from when I casually asked about a $320,000 talent optimization fund allocated to a team that didn't exist. Just internal shuffling, Michael had said. Nothing to worry your pretty little head about. I remember that exact phrase. He said it with a smirk, as if I were a child asking why the sky was blue. There were other moments, too. Dozens of times I'd flagged unusual disbursements and been handed a coffee instead of an answer. Told to focus on the big picture or reminded that not everything needs your signature. Little breadcrumbs that I'd brushed off because I trusted the system. I trusted Michael. I trusted that 11 years of clean audits meant something. But they didn't. I was the only firewall between his scam and the outside world. The moment I sniffed too close, he torched me. Fast, surgical, and public. A preemptive strike in broad daylight. But he forgot one thing. He trained me too well. Every version I was assembling now was meticulous, as if the SEC themselves had handed me a clipboard and said, "Walk us through it, line by line." I was naming files things like Blackwood Pattern Crossref Final, XLX, and Michael Approval Slip 3am.pdf. I wasn't just building a report. I was laying out an indictment. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th creative consulting disbursement tied to that ghost LLC, I leaned back, cracked my knuckles, and felt something click into place. He thought I was gone. I was just getting started. The sun was coming up, but I wasn't done, or even tired. That wired, bone-deep insomnia had settled in, like my nervous system had handed the wheel to my sense of justice and said, "Have at it." I moved like a surgeon, focused, cold, deliberate. Every keystroke had intention. Every file had a purpose. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was preparing for war. A war waged in PDFs and metadata. One where the scalpel wasn't a subpoena, it was clarity. First step, whistleblower statutes. I had skimmed them before, when a colleague was pushed out for flagging a data breach and buried under an NDA like a mob hit. This time, I wasn't skimming. I was absorbing. Section 302 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Dodd-Frank Protections, SEC Form TCR Submission Protocols. The legal texts became my scripture. I wasn't going to be caught stumbling. I was going to show up in their inboxes like a forensic ghost with a fully indexed file. I loaded everything: evidence folders, source trails, Excel comparisons, invoice scans, into an encrypted archive with a passphrase that would make the NSA sweat. Then I printed hard copies on acid-free paper with no traceable IDs. Those files got dropped in 3 different locations. One in my home safe, one in a bank deposit box I opened under my maiden name, and my favorite, sealed in a manila envelope labeled Insurance Policy, Do Not Shred, and hand-delivered to my cousin's law office. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being methodical. The real turning point came when I read a line on a legal advice forum. If you've been terminated, the company cannot enforce internal confidentiality clauses regarding observed fraud. I reread that sentence 3 times and sat back in my chair because they had fired me publicly. No NDA, no hush money, no offboarding paperwork that tied my hands. I wasn't just free, I was legally cleared to burn the whole rotten house down. That's when I opened the real gold mine. Buried inside one of Michael's final approval PDFs, when he must have signed off late at night using his personal email by mistake, was a memo with the subject line Q3 Restructure, sensitive eyes only. The language was subtle, polished, but I knew sanitized executive speak when I saw it. It referenced a quiet restructure designed to optimize headcount ahead of regulatory review and reallocate discretionary surplus for long-term advisory retention. Translation: layoffs, shell payments, bonuses through dummy vendors, the whole scheme. And it predated my firing by 6 weeks. Meaning they knew. They planned it. They needed me out of the way before the audit cycle kicked in. I wasn't just a risk to their scam. I was the only person with the knowledge and the nerve to unmask it. I sat there, wide-eyed, rereading that memo. Somewhere outside, a jogger trotted past my window, oblivious to the fact that inside this unassuming house, someone was building a bomb made entirely of truth. The irony? Michael always mocked me for over-documenting. He thought my obsession with audit trails and redundant logs was a waste of bandwidth. Well, Michael, guess what? It turns out the woman you fired for being too careful is about to become your worst nightmare. The complaint I sent to the SEC wasn't a Word doc with bullet points and drama. It was a portfolio, tight, chronological, and cross-referenced like a symphony. 63 exhibits indexed by category: financial misstatement, vendor fraud, internal memos, altered audit trails. Each one stamped with metadata timecodes, hashed signatures, file names so clean you could floss with them. And I didn't stop there. I duplicated the whole package, reformatted it slightly, and fired it off to the IRS whistleblower office. Different department, different thresholds, but the fraud fit both molds like a tailored suit. Tax evasion, unreported offshore assets, falsified vendor deductions, the works. If Michael wanted to play kingpin, I was giving him the full RICO treatment. The last email I sent was to someone not listed in any government directory, a lawyer I met 5 years ago at a forensic compliance conference. We'd bonded over bad coffee and our shared hatred of buzzwords like synergize and agile pivot. She had once told me, "If you ever need to make someone disappear with paperwork, call me." So I did. The message was short. "I've got a case, SEC plus IRS jurisdiction. Need a firewall and eyes. Files attached. Use the burner I left in your office drawer." She replied 20 minutes later with a single word: "Received." I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just sat back in my chair and stared at the sent mail screen like it was a tombstone. Not for me, but for them. That was the moment. The irreversible step. I could almost hear Michael's smug voice echoing from some marketing suite across town, totally unaware that his whole house of cards had just been kicked in the throat. The closest thing I felt to happiness was quiet. That dead silent kind of calm you get after a tornado misses your house by half an inch. Not joy, not pride, just rightness. I stood up, stretched my neck until it popped, and went to make tea. The real kind, not the watery garbage from the office break room. The kettle whistled just as my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no name, no location. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Same number. I answered on the third ring because I don't run. Not anymore. "Hi there," said a voice, smooth as laminate and twice as fake. "We've heard some things floating around. Just wanted to check in, see if you were considering any legal action, before the press starts sniffing." My stomach didn't drop. My heart didn't race. I just stared out the window, steam curling off my mug, and said, "And who exactly is we?" Click. The line went dead. No threat, no name, just a sniff of fear. That's how you know the story is spreading. But they hadn't even begun to sweat, because tucked in the tail end of my SEC file was one last gift. 3 separate reports Michael had signed off on after hours. Nothing odd, except when I pulled the metadata, the timestamps didn't match the document histories, meaning he'd altered finalized reports after submission, backdated approvals, shifted numbers, fabricated timing. I had the original files. I had the doctored versions. I had the audit trail of him logging into his VPN at 3:14 a.m. and exporting a file he later claimed he'd reviewed live with the board. I saved that evidence for dessert, because when the suits come knocking, and they will, it won't be because I yelled the loudest. It'll be because I documented the quiet parts perfectly. The email had no sender name, just a blank field and the subject line, "Saw what you did." I opened it with one finger, expecting some trolling finance bro calling me bitter or a lunatic. Instead, it was 2 sentences. Short, brutal. "Michael started laying the groundwork for your firing weeks ago. Told the C-suite you were too detail-obsessed to be trusted. No signature, no sign-off, no need." I knew exactly who it came from. Derek, the junior analyst who always refilled my stapler without asking. The one who looked at Michael like he was God until Michael made him take the fall for a botched Q1 forecast and coached him out by proxy. Weeks. He'd been plotting my exit for weeks. Not over a typo, not over a budget slip, but because I knew too much. Because I asked too many questions. Because I made the mistake of being a woman who never smiled when told to relax. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt confirmation, like a steel rod was slotting into my spine. I pulled open my disaster protocol folder and clicked through to a backup upload service with end-to-end encryption. No names, no metadata retention. I zipped up everything, every file, every log, every red flag vendor payment, and attached a plain text summary written like a press release. Then I wrote the subject line: "Internal financial fraud materials prepared under whistleblower statute for release if no action by 7 days." I CC'd 4 people: an investigative journalist at a major newspaper, a senior editor at a nonprofit news organization, a finance beat reporter I met years ago who owed me a favor, and one wild card, a YouTuber whose forensic audits had taken down 2 hedge funds and 2. The message was simple: this is not for publication yet. Just hold it. If the SEC moves, delete it. If they don't, you know what to do. I hit send. Then I sat back and remembered everything. Michael telling me to calm down in front of the C-suite after I asked where $2.3 million in consulting fees went during a quarter with no consultants. Michael waving his hand and saying, "That's not your lane," when I flagged that 3 separate vendors shared the same P.O. box in Delaware. Michael chuckling at my paranoia when I color-coded approval chains for a routine expense audit. I remembered the smirk on his face when he fired me, the too fast smile, the way he didn't look surprised, just relieved. This wasn't revenge anymore. This wasn't about bruised pride. This was about every woman in business who got called aggressive instead of prepared. Every person who got told they were overthinking when they were really 5 steps ahead of a man with something to hide. Michael didn't just try to silence me. He tried to erase me. But here's the thing about erasing people like me. We make carbon copies. The kicker? When I reread the whistleblower statute, one clause stuck with me. In cases of material financial recovery, a whistleblower may be eligible for up to 30% of collected proceeds. I wasn't just exposing fraud. I was entitled to a cut of whatever they clawed back. Meaning, if I did this right, Michael wouldn't just lose everything. He'd be paying me for it. It started with a ping on my second laptop, the one I used for firewall scraping and back-channel digging. An alert popped up from a shadow marketing forum I'd flagged months ago. There it was, a new thread. Bitter ex-employee leaks fabricated files after botching $60 million campaign audit. It was tagged with my initials. A pixelated photo of me from a conference panel, cropped and filtered, was under a header that read, "Never trust a woman who color codes her spreadsheets." The comments were worse. Weaponizing her gender to settle a score. Probably got dumped and needed a new hobby. Another Juliet with a grudge. I didn't breathe for a full minute. Then came the next hit. A text from an old colleague, Mark, a screenshot from their internal Slack channel. Michael's message was bolded. "We're aware of rumors circulating. Disgruntled former employees sometimes feel the need to lash out. No merit to any of it. Stay focused. Disgruntled former. No merit." He was already scrubbing the narrative clean, planting poison before the bloom. I pictured him with that same practiced smirk, typing in his office while bragging to some board member that the fire was already under control. I'd expected pushback, but I hadn't expected it to feel so public, so surgical. I wasn't just being undermined. I was being erased and rebranded as unstable, vindictive, and over-emotional. The same trick they use on every woman who ever told the truth too early. My hands were shaking. For the first time since I started this, I felt it. Fear. What if the SEC stalled? What if this all got dragged into some slow-moving bureaucratic inquest and buried beneath NDAs and pending investigations? Michael had power, money, friends in tailored suits who knew how to spin doubt and drink it with a twist of plausible deniability. And me? I had truth. But truth without force is just paperwork. I stared out the window, unsure for the first time, doubting, second-guessing, wondering if I should have just walked away and let the rot eat itself from the inside. Then my phone buzzed. No name, just a number I'd memorized. Claire, my lawyer. One line, check the news at 7 a.m. sharp. That was it. No emojis, no extra context, just 6 words that hit harder than anything the trolls had thrown. I looked at the clock. 6:12 a.m. 48 minutes to go. I made tea with steady hands and didn't bother adding sugar. I sat in silence and watched the seconds tick down, because something was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one under the microscope. 7 o'clock a.m. exactly. I didn't refresh the news site. I opened it cold, like cracking a sealed envelope. No expectations, no prayers, Just a sip of plain black tea and a browser tab waiting to detonate. And there it was. SEC freezes accounts linked to executive fraud. 60 memos missing from Redstone Media. The headline sat there like a verdict. No metaphors, no qualifiers, just facts. The kind that ruins golf games and makes PR departments chain smoke before noon. The article itself was clinical. Names redacted, pending further investigation, but the details were unmistakable. Multiple shell entities under review, financial statements under federal lock, internal approvals under forensic audit. I knew the breadcrumbs. I laid them. 3 paragraphs in, investigators cited a whistleblower who provided a trail of falsified compliance documents, off-book vendor disbursements, and doctored metadata. That was me. No name, no credit, just impact. I didn't smile. I just took another sip of tea and watched the steam curl up like smoke from a controlled burn. Then came the Slack leaks, screenshots forwarded anonymously to my encrypted inbox. The company-wide chat was melting down in real time. One message stood out, pinned by an anonymous account that had somehow CC'd me without tripping any trace. Legal says, "Do not delete anything. All backups are being pulled. This is federal." And Michael? Silent. Not a word, not a peep. Just a long, threadbare silence where his performative optimism used to be. But I saw the fear secondhand in the nervous emojis. The managers typing and deleting, the late-night meeting invites going out like distress flares. There was no mugshot yet, no public walk. But I could feel it coming. That weighty, inevitable crack in the marble facade. Funny thing, the spreadsheet typo, the tiny mistake they claimed was my mortal sin. It was a column misalignment on a Q4 summary. A vendor ID had shifted one cell to the left, landing next to a holding account instead of its legitimate destination. One glance, and any rookie would have fixed it. But that misalignment exposed a dummy entity that wasn't supposed to exist. A ghost vendor tied to no physical address, no records, just a line item bleeding 6 figures into the void. It was his sloppiness, not mine. Michael's laziness, his arrogance, his belief that the details didn't matter because the people watching them didn't matter. I was never the mistake. I was the mirror. And he broke himself trying to shatter it. By 9 a.m., the dominoes weren't just falling. They were detonating. Michael's name hit the federal asset freeze list like a thunderclap. His personal accounts locked. Every shell LLC tied to his college roommate frozen. 5 dummy vendors across 3 states red flagged. Traced, now part of an official investigation involving the words wire fraud, false accounting, and my personal favorite, conspiracy. The firm's valuation plummeted faster than a trust fall off a cliff. Clients fled. Partners distanced themselves. The board issued a statement that read like it was typed with trembling hands. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators in relation to significant uncovered fraud tied to a now terminated executive. Uncovered, as if it had just happened to rise out of the carpet like mildew. They didn't mention my name, but I didn't need them to. By noon, whispers had turned to a wildfire. Professional forums shared posts with headlines like, "The Compliance Witch Who Saved Redstone Media $60," a title not meant kindly, but I didn't care. Let them clutch their pearls and call me names, because I was the one who read every footnote, the one who saw through the jargon and polite corruption, the one they underestimated. I never went back. Not for severance, not for apologies, not even to gloat. My name lives in encrypted case files now, in legal briefings, and in whispered warnings across corporate compliance teams who suddenly decided to take internal audit seriously. Michael is a headline, a cautionary tale, a LinkedIn profile scrubbed clean, replaced with a silent white page and a pending court date. And me? I'm still sipping tea in the same kitchen, still using the same backup laptop, still watching as the system that tried to chew me up now has to swallow its own tail. They fired me for a spreadsheet typo, but I was the only one who read every line.